Hi, wine lovers. Martin Cody here, co-founder of Cellar Angels. I really want to alert you to this special episode that we had with Jon Phillips, owner of Inspiration Vineyards, because we had a special guest and subject matter. Jon was talking about the family winemakers of California. This is a very important group, been around for 30 years, helping the small, independent family wineries of California navigate all of the regulatory requirements to be able to ship wines from California to various states and basically how to do that. We also touch on and get a little bit deep into the economics of wine production. How much does it really cost to produce a bottle of wine in Sonoma? Very interesting. We were drinking Jon's Grenache. He did a deep dive on the Grenache, did a deep dive on the portfolio. Between Inspiration Vineyards and also the family winemakers, you are in for a treat in learning just what is required to actually produce wine in California and get it to market, and why you have to be really passionate to make certain that happens. Open up a bottle, kick back, grab your favorite glass. You are in for a fun time with Jon and the crowd. Enjoy SIP episode 76. Hello, everybody. Actually, it is SIP episode 76. My name is Martin Cody, co-founder of Cellar Angels. And if this is your first time here, I know I see some people right now, Elisa, Julie, Karen, Lori, Michael. And notice I'm not pronouncing your last names, Lori, not because you didn't give us the phonetic pronunciation. I feel so proud that I could pronounce that if I needed to. However, we're understanding that best practices require us not to pronounce the last name. So we're going to stick with best practices. We're also going to welcome a guest who is near and dear to many of the Cellar Angels. But for those folks, I almost said Christopher's last name, Hans and Caitlin, hello. For those folks that are unfamiliar with Cellar Angels or unfamiliar with SIP, Cellar Angels is a direct-to-consumer wine curator specializing exclusively and only in Napa, Sonoma, limited production wineries. So this is your opportunity to gain privileged access, bypass the middleman, and get wines like one that we're going to taste this evening sent to your door. I strongly encourage you to go to the Cellar Angels website at cellarangels.com. And the easiest thing to do right off the bat is acquire a SIP kit. In that kit, you will have 4 wines for the next 4 consecutive Fridays, and you can taste along with a winemaker, such as we're going to be doing this evening. And speaking of this winemaker, it is a person who we have known at Cellar Angels for probably now going on 10 some odd years, and who added recently to his title as, in addition to vintner, he is now Chairman Emeritus of the Family Winemakers of California. So without further ado, let's please give a standing ovation to Jon Phillips.
Thank you, Martin. And Denise, appreciate the introduction. And yes, Martin said before the call that emeritus seems like a title that should be given to someone that is in their, I guess, in their 80s, right? So I am actually the former chair of Family Winemakers, and they created the position so that I wouldn't leave the board and can continue to contribute. And actually my sole mission in the organization is to now kind of jumpstart trying to re-energize people, winery owners here in the state, and to develop more membership in our organization. So that's why I'm the chair emeritus in the organization.
And this will be a great episode for people because we talk often, not in great financial details about the difficulty of being a small limited production winery. We do it at high level, broad brush strokes. Land is more expensive, juice is more expensive, some of the raw materials are more expensive. But tonight we're actually going to go into the nitty gritty of a cost of bottle of wine and just how painful and how impactful and how so many external factors like tariffs, for example, filter down to the small producer. Family Winemakers of California, and I don't want to steal Jon's thunder, they basically live to help these small family winemakers grow and survive. And when you, Cellar Angels fans and wine purchasers, actually purchase and acquire these wines via our platform or direct from the winery, you're helping them keep the lights on. And that's really what it's all about, bypassing the middleman, going direct to the source that's making the wines and asking questions of the winemaker, like we're going to be doing this evening. And again, in tradition, at the bottom of the hour, if you are so inclined to turn on your cameras, we would love to see your faces. Ivy is here, Brett is here, Peter is here from Chicago. Two Pete's, as a matter of fact. John, you know the other one because he's with Family Winemakers. So why don't we, for people that don't know your background with Inspiration, and this, by the way, is what family winemaking looks like. This is John in the vineyard pruning an old ancient Zinfandel vine. Tell us a little bit about Inspiration Vineyards.
Great. So I moved to Sonoma County in 2001 with the mission of starting a winery from scratch. I bought a vineyard property that had planted 100-year-old vines Zinfandel, and at the time, probably about 3-year-old Chardonnay vines. And it was a 6-acre property, and I had studied classes on winemaking at Davis, but started taking classes at the junior college here in Sonoma County on grape growing, and then took over managing my own vineyard and started it really from scratch. Started the winery on our property out on Olivet Road, and very quickly learned how many different regulatory agencies that you have to work with to start just a small, modest little winery. It is another reason why the old adage is true. To make a small fortune in the wine business, you start with a large fortune, because you really have to spend a lot of money, not only just on the infrastructure of the winery, the tools you need to make good wine, but also really all the regulatory aspects of the wine industry cost money. That could be permits, insurance, licensing. It's not an inexpensive thing. And it also is something that just takes some endurance in order to be able to go through that process. So that's exactly how I got started. And then kind of getting into the wine industry, once you start having a product, you need to market the product. And so at the time I started, you're looking for channels in ways in which you can get your name out. And one of the organizations that initially caught my eye was Family Winemakers of California. They conduct 2 tastings here in the state. What's unique about the family winemaking tastings, or the Family Winemakers tastings, is that their focus is on trade. So you have an opportunity to get in front of restaurant owners, wine shop owners, also distributors and brokers. And so unlike a lot of the consumer tastings that are organized throughout the state today, FWC really had a focus really on trade tasting. There are 2 tastings, one in San Francisco and one in Southern California, which at the time was either Pasadena or San Diego. So that's initially how I got involved in the organization, because I saw the benefits of getting my name out there and being involved in meeting distributors and brokers that I wouldn't normally meet, because where do you meet these people? And that's kind of the start.
Is there, I think you mentioned or touched upon kind of the difficulty of getting the product out there. And Cellar Angels fans have heard it a long time, and we've said it for the better part of 11 years. Making wine is technically easy. Selling wine is not so easy. And so this gives you a vehicle and a market to get out in front of these people. But is there a case production threshold to where, I mean, how do you make that decision to go to trade? Because you're at 500 case production right now across, 7, 8, 10 SKUs. So is there an economic balance or an accounting scale that says, okay, I'm at 750 cases and I now need to be in a 3rd state or a 4th state? How do you come up to those decisions?
So when I first started, and when I first left my full-time job and really started ramping up production, I was up at one time to about 2,000 cases. And so what you're looking at is how much wine can you sell direct to consumer? And then based on direct to consumer sales, you then back off and say, okay, you're trying to sell through a vintage in 1 year, because every year you're going to be making wine, and every year you're going to have a new vintage and new inventory that you have to then worry about. Wine is a perishable product. It has, especially white wine, there is bias in the marketplace if your white wine is older than 2 vintages. And so maintaining that turn of your inventory is so critical. And so that's when you realize, okay, I need to find a way to move that excess product if you can't sell it through your direct to consumer. And so that
shades of Lucille Ball on the assembly line are coming at
pretty
me
much. Yeah. Yeah.
when that vintage comes out and there's still previous vintage left.
And I guess, again, looking at family winemakers, and this kind of expands about the organization, which is that it was founded in 1990. Obviously everyone's familiar with Kendall Jackson and Jess Jackson. He was really one of the leaders to start Family Winemakers of California because he was trying to open up distribution channels himself. The Wine Institute is our other trade organization here in the state. And the Wine Institute generally represents the interests of very large wineries and that three-tier distribution channel. Family Winemakers, started out with, Jess and a handful of other prominent wineries today, and they were looking at ways to expand their direct-to-consumer markets. And so it was really through their pioneering in, challenging laws in states, including funding the Supreme Court case Granholm versus Heald in
2005.
Yeah, exactly. 2004, 2005. That allowed opening of states that today we take advantage of 43 states where we can at least obtain permits and be able to ship wine. And so it was really that effort. And also Family Winemakers was one of the very first organizations to conduct a trade tasting where they brought their winery members in and then were able to attract trade. So those were the really cool things that I started discovering about the organization once I became involved in it. And then from there, just again, having dealt with the myriad of regulatory issues and compliance issues, I started realizing that the legislative part of the process, that's the secret. I guess what I heard today is what's the saying about making sausage? That's the sausage making that happens in Sacramento. That also impacts my ability to be able to get my product out in the marketplace. And so being involved with Family Winemakers has taught me that sometimes my interests as a small producer are different than some of the larger interests that are represented by Wine Institute. And it's been a really fascinating process being involved with the organization because I've met lawmakers and I've talked directly to them about the challenges. I've been able to pick up the phone and call the assistant director at Alcohol Beverage Control in Sacramento and said, hey, what this director here or deputy director did in Santa Rosa is not correct. We need to challenge this on behalf of our members because this particular ruling that this person made isn't correct. And so learning more about how the laws work, what a lot of people don't know about alcohol law is that, especially here in California, unless you can explicitly do it, it's against the law. Meaning that, the old saying that I can ask for forgiveness. Well, no, if you don't know that you can do it for sure, then chances are it's against the law. That's how alcohol law is written. So again, understanding that process, understanding how the state works and being able to work with the different agencies is something that Family Winemakers does on behalf of its members. And so that's why it's an important organization.
And just even more context, alcohol is the second most regulated item in the United States behind nuclear. So you can only imagine from a standpoint of regulatory issues. And I remember back in 2009 when Cellar Angels was working with California ABC and various law firms explaining our model. They indicated that they themselves were hamstrung because they said, you don't understand. We have laws in the book that say it's illegal to ride your oxen down the street still. And that's the type of archaic law system that you're dealing with.
It's the only product that's in our Constitution. If you think about the fact that alcohol and the 21st Amendment, I mean, this is a product that it's the only thing still recognized. I mean, even cannabis right now is not even written in, right? So it's kind of interesting that it's definitely a product that is highly regulated and you have to be able to follow the rules. Otherwise you get in trouble and that's not good. So
no, and the Family Winemakers FWC has a pretty full-time job. And part of it is because of the number of wineries in California. And I'm going to launch that first question, poll question. So for those of you sipping wine, get your keyboards ready. Jan, I said hello to you in chat. How many wineries are in California? 6,500, 1,986, 3,674. Is there a C? Over 4,000?
Can I answer that one?
Not yet, but you can.
Okay. Well, let me talk. This is a perfect time to talk a little bit about that too. One of the things that also sets Family Winemakers of California, makes them unique to the Wine Institute as an example, is that we have wineries, and then we also have producers of wine who are not wineries, but have permits to sell wine. So, and if I can kind of, again, break that down just a little bit, I'm considered a wine grower. We have a type of numbering system of our licenses here in the state. So I'm considered a type 2 wine grower. And so the number that you're probably looking at, Martin, is that number of how many wineries are wine growers here in the state.
Well, I'll show the number, and then you can answer correctly. And then the number, I'm surprised no one picked C.
Is there a C?
There's actually 2 answers that I found in the research that are potentially correct here.
Okay.
So why don't you?
My number is 4,700 approximately.
Yep.
That's my number.
Correct.
Okay.
So over 4,000 is in fact correct. I did see the 4,000 number, I think might be as of early 2021, because I saw something that had 3,674. So over 4,000. So when you think about 4,700 wineries, and there's a shade about 12,000 wineries in the US, give or take, you're looking at California having, just under about 47-48% of the total wineries in the US. So it's a significant responsibility that FWC has in trying to help promote, make certain these folks can, get through the regulatory process, find avenues to market. It's a big job.
And right now, just to kind of, and my job is a big job because of that number that you just mentioned. We only have about 150 people paying dues right now that are members of Family Winemakers. So within our own industry, there's a lack of really just awareness of what we do and how we exist to help them. And that's one reason why I really appreciate the invitation of being on, because I'd like to at least get the other 150 that we have to renew their dues, because they didn't see the tasting going on and because of COVID, so they didn't send in their dues check. And now that we have the tasting starting, we'll probably be able to reattract them. But what we do is significant in terms of helping wineries be able to be on a level playing field here in the state. One of the other points I also wanted to make is that these are wine growers. These are people that either have brick and mortar wineries or have their permits under an umbrella winery, which we call alternating proprietor wineries. The custom crush wineries are not included in this number. And this is someone that doesn't want to have a tasting room. They just want to be able to sell on the internet or sell to trade or restaurants, wholesalers. And these are folks that pay a winery to do all their winemaking. And they may even be a winemaker themselves that can go in and spec out the wine the way they want it. Maybe they're sourcing the grapes. They could even be the vineyard owner bringing their fruit in, but contracting with the winery to do all the work, pay all the permit, taxes on the wine, do all of the federal reporting and state reporting, and then they take that wine and they sell it under a permit we call 1720. It's 2 different permits letting you distribute your wine. And Family Winemakers represents 1720s. There are thousands and thousands, probably, I don't know, close to another 5, 6, 7,000
I think
people here in the state.
Zoetic Wines, Kim Vance, who you know, is a 1720.
Yep.
And she doesn't have a physical structure, works out of a tasting room. John has been kind enough to allow us to film some of Kim's videos in his vineyards. But yeah, there's another, like you said, 500 or so wineries. It's sky's the limit on that one. So it's interesting because you mentioned the regulatory process, and some people don't recognize that you produce wine, and if you want to, send the wine to California or send the wine to Illinois, to Florida, to Texas, to New York, you have to actually file an application in each one of those states, correct?
And as a wine grower, versus at 1720, I can actually get the permit because I can demonstrate that I'm a winery owner. So I have to provide a copy of my permit to Illinois because I ship a lot of wine to Illinois. And I tell them, okay, here is my federal permit. Here's my state permit. Can you grant me a state permit to be able to ship wine to your residence in the state of Illinois? And it's about $500 a year to get the privilege of being able to sell wine in the state of Illinois.
Well, and that brings up another point. And let me just back up for a second. If you are a producer of grapes, can you produce, say, brandy or cognac, or does it have to be wine?
If you have the wine grower permit, the O2 permit, you can sell brandy. However, if you have a wine grower permit, you cannot produce the brandy. So you can make the still wine that's used in making the brandy, and then you send that still wine to a distributor, I'm sorry, to a distiller, or you get a distiller license so that you can also do that in-house, but you must send it to someone who has a distiller permit. The other little caveat there is I can't bottle it either. You have to have that same distiller permit to bottle that brandy or cognac. So in fact,
you probably have to have a different license to sell it then into states.
No,
okay,
I can,
good.
if I grew the grapes, or if I made the wine and I had it distilled for me and I had it bottled for me without the distiller permit, I can receive it back and I can sell that brandy under my existing permit.
All right, that actually would make me want to drink.
I do have brandy in-house in barrel right now because I don't have the permit to be able to bottle it, but I can store the barrel in my wine. So there you go.
Well, I want to carry the Illinois example a little bit further so people can have an appreciation of just how challenging it is as a family winemaker. And keep in mind, more often than not, this is a team of people. This isn't a division of people. This is a family, 4, 5, 6 people max that are also in the fields like this tending the grapevines. So Illinois has a $500 annual license application process to be able to sell wine into the state. That just gives you the right to sell it. You still have to figure out a way to get it inside the distribution channel, go travel to the market, meet with the restaurant owners and do all that. That's just Illinois. And then Illinois also has a certain frequency and cadence of how often the winery has to report the taxes that they're collecting and or paying. I don't know if Illinois is monthly or quarterly. It's monthly. Yep, monthly. Florida has a different application fee. Texas has a different application fee. Nevada, Arizona, New York, Michigan, Minnesota, every single one of them has a different application process, a different application fee, and a different cadence of how often you have to report how much wine you sold into the state, what taxes you collected because they want their tax money. So you can see how burdensome it is and how the system is essentially rigged against the small family winemakers, which is really why we exist. Yeah, exactly. So you have to be, I would imagine, very meticulous on the states you select to go into based upon kind of some of the hurdles and obstacles that they have in place and just how onerous that's going to be.
Yes. So when I took my very first wine marketing class before I produced a legal bottle of wine, the best advice that I could have ever received was given to me. And I didn't know at the time that it was the best advice. But this goes back to one of your first questions, Martin, which is, how do you decide where you're going to sell your wine? How do you decide who's going to sell your wine if you're not selling it? What markets you want to be in? And the advice that was given to me is, if you do decide to sell or need to sell outside of your direct-to-consumer base, hence why having a tasting room is important, pick a location where you want to visit, because you're going to have to visit that location to be able to represent the brand that you built. Even if you get a distributor or a broker in those markets, they want you to come and actually introduce the product because you're the face of the brand. So yep. I have family in Illinois, and obviously I've stayed at your place in Illinois when you lived in Chicago. And I have very close friends I ski with in Colorado. So right now, Illinois and Colorado are my two primary locations where I sell almost all of my out-of-state wine, other than my wine club where I ship cases out to people all over the United States. But Illinois and Colorado are the markets I visit because I have friends there. I've got customers there. I ship a lot of wine out of state to those markets direct to consumer, and with some trade accounts in Illinois, because Illinois did something in 2008, right when I became self-employed, allowing me to ship wine direct to retail and cut out the distributor. And that's how I was able to sell through your store when you had a store in Chicago. But it was dumb luck because not all states do that. In Colorado, you have to have an importer on top of your distributor to be able to sell your wine to a wholesale account, to restaurant or wine shop. So
what are we talking about here for numbers? And Ron may know this because we talk about case production numbers often.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there is like 31 wineries or something that are producing 500,000 cases or more, maybe 17 wineries. And then you go to 100,000, then you go to 50,000, then you're at 25, 10, 5. And so in that last couple of tiers, you've got limited production or small winery, and it's like 5,000 cases is a small winery, and then limited production is under 1,000 cases. And yet that comprises, those two brackets right there comprise about 85% of the wineries in California. So if you're a consumer, you don't even have access to roughly 85% of the wineries because they don't have any distribution. So it's incumbent upon going out to the various wine regions all around the state and going tasting. And I think we can all agree there are worse things to do than going wine tasting. But it's amazing to me that you got, yeah, you're right, lucky in 2008 when Illinois invoked a direct-to-trade opportunity. But even then, you had to produce under a certain amount of gallonage to be able to do that. Otherwise, you weren't able to fall through that crack, I think is too kind. You would miss that requirement, but you're right, not every state has that. So it is a tremendous burden to be a small production winery and try to get your product into other states. The regulatory thing is just one area. I'm going to throw up another question, John, and I don't know the answer to this. You may have, I think this is probably personal per winery or per winery owner. The single most challenging aspect about owning a small family winery is what? Dealing with Mother Nature, regulatory items, state reporting requirements, and all of the, the insanity that you talked about, raw materials, land or fruit costs, finding great people to work with, getting in front of customers, virtual Zoom tastings. And there is, and I probably could have put all of the above, but I was looking for something like, what is in your mind the single hardest thing? And I'm going to give this about another 5 seconds, 4, 3, and then Lori, I will get to your question as a follow-up to people changing their numbers. So before I share what the audience picked, do you want to share what it is to you?
Sure. I think, we talked a little bit at the beginning about selling the product is a really difficult thing. I think it is for some winemakers who don't have the personality to get out in front of people and sell. And it's funny, when I took my wine marketing class, there were about 50 of us in the room. And the first thing the teacher or the professor asked was, okay, how many of you really love to sell wine? And I raised my hand, I'm really excited. And I was the only one in the class of about 50 people to raise their hand because I'm a goofball. And I had taught wine education for years at a winery, and I enjoyed getting in front of people. And that was one of the reasons why I came into this business, because I love selling wine, especially when you have people that are interested and happy. So my answer is regulatory. I have to tell you, and I spend more time on regulatory than anything else. So there you go.
Now that's interesting because I certainly would see in the last 5 or 6 years, Mother Nature could be climbing the ranks as really, really difficult things. But the regulatory stuff is consistent. It's hard every year. It's changing things every year. And there are nefarious forces at work to make it hard on you. And I mean, John, by the way, yeah, we loved having John stay at our house when we lived in downtown Chicago, because those of you in the Chicago region, you know how expensive hotels are downtown. When someone wants to come in and work the market, first of all, you got to fly to the market, then you've got to get a rental car, then you've got to get lodging, then you have to eat, and then you've got to hit 2 or 3 appointments per day, and then work with distributors, and then you got to get home at night, process orders, and traveling to markets is hard work. And then on top of that, to have the regulatory items, it is just brutal. So it's crazy. On the wine clubs that you have, they don't require all of the same fees or permitting at all because they're buying direct from you in California. Is that, I mean, you don't have a license in Kansas, but you could have a wine club member in Kansas.
Yeah, now you're kind of getting into the gray area of what a small winery does versus a larger, more financially secure winery does, right? There are ways in which you can get product to people that are in states that you don't have permits. I have kind of stopped doing that for the most part, simply because it's like looking over your shoulder, how eventually you're going to get caught. And I don't want to be that person that gets caught.
Right.
But then at the same time, the amounts of wine that I was shipping was like a case a year, or, half a case a year. So we're not talking about a lot of egregious shipping.
Right.
But I have
lost tax revenue.
But it is, it's definitely, when you have someone coming from out of state who you don't have a permit with, it's really a hard discussion to say, I want to sell to you, but, sadly, you're in a state that it's a felony, like Utah, where you ship a case of wine into Utah and you're risking having a felony, which then you're risking having your whole permit taken away from you, which, as a convicted felon, you can't hold a winery permit. So it's kind of that's another reason why family winemakers exists, is that we try to find ways in which we can work within the law to be able to expand markets for people. And that's one of the issues that we constantly talk about, is how can we make it so that it works? For example, can we ship it to a licensee that has the permits so that they just simply hand it off to the customer? I mean, there are ways to work within the system, but you have to be creative in thinking about how to do it legally. So,
well, and then it's Peter, I see your question, and I think the answer, I mean, Peter asked a question: if you own multiple wine labels, can you get one license, or does each label brand need their own license? And you could have, I mean, you have 10 different labels underneath Inspiration, but Inspiration is still the title.
Good question. So the answer to that question is it varies. In some states, I'll use Illinois as a good example. So first of all, it's the bottling winery that is responsible for paying the taxes and is the winery of record in producing it. So let's say that I used to have a label, I called it my second label, and then I have a label that I produced with a friend of mine, business partner at the winery. All 3 of the labels, the Inspiration and the other 2, are produced at Inspiration, produced under my bond, and therefore I'm the winery of record that's bottling those wines. Even in California, I have to register those labels, and we're talking brands. We're not talking about actual varietal labels. That's a little bit different. So these brand labels are registered under my permit. If I want to sell them in Illinois, all I have to do is go out to the Illinois website, to my licensed area, and then I would add those brand labels so that I can then sell them in Illinois. And in terms of my individual labels under Inspiration, I do make several different varieties now, about 6 now consistently, and each of those have a federal label approval. So that's a federal approval, but again, one brand with 6 different varieties. And again, you just have to register the brand with the state that you're selling in. So it's not too hard, but yeah, you have to keep track of it.
And what does the state ultimately want?
The state wants you to pay taxes. Ultimately, it's about paying sales tax, paying excise tax in the state, and sales tax for some states, that making sure you're collecting it. There's often been the excuse of, the 3-tier system protects the consumer, making sure they get the right product. Well, that's bullshit. I mean, we all know that wineries have to produce a product and sell them and have to maintain that credibility in order to selling a proper product. And there are mechanisms to make it so that wineries will pay the taxes. It's not like we won't, because we will. I think every winery owner will tell you we want to follow the rules and just get access to the market to be able to sell to our customers.
So if the state at the state level is interested in collecting its fair share of tax revenue, and they're making you go through the application process, which has nothing to do with taxes, right? They just want a little grease off the top. $500 application fee here, $350 at this state, whatever it may be. Couldn't they come up with a system of of saying, and Pete, I'm sure you've asked this question for the last 30 some odd years. Here's an idea, guys and gals. We sold 32 cases into your state last year. I'm fairly certain I'm going to sell 32 again. I'll pay my taxes right now up front. If I sell greater than X% above 32, you can hit me up again for whatever the tax is that. If I sell underneath 32 by a considerable, standard deviation, then I would like that prorated to next year when I apply. It seems that it would be a heck of a lot easier from a record keeping standpoint than having potentially 4,000 wineries filling out applications in 16 different states. Pete, did they ever come up with a solution for that?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the opportunity. So John started this off talking about Jess Jackson, who I worked for 20 years and was deeply involved in what he called 5 guys in a fax machine, which started Family Winemakers. Martin, it's all about the Benjamins. As long as the states get their taxes, they're pretty happy. One of the problems with that is that after Prohibition, the states, because they were not a dynamic, set up a relationship with the wholesalers, where the wholesalers would bring in the wine, they would pay the taxes to the states. So there's this relationship that has gone on since the 30s that we're really trying to figure out a way for small wineries like John's Winery to not subvert the system, but to engage with the system, pay the taxes legally. But the pushback from the wholesalers has been it's amazing.
Yeah, because if you're going to say it's all about the Benjamins, they see you as coming in on their turf.
Yeah, it's that simple. Yeah.
Unless you're a distributor in East St. Louis, which is writing legislation for the distributors in Illinois because they don't want people in St. Louis to buy wine underage. That was a beautiful legislation that they wrote. I don't know the last time anybody underage went to the internet to buy wine. I had older brothers and sisters that were faster than the internet.
Well, that's why we have all the stuff on the internet to make sure that you're 21, you're legally can buy wine. And I'm going to give the wholesalers credit here. They really did set up a almost impenetrable system, but we're going to keep chipping away at it.
I like it. Almost impenetrable. And I think the direct from consumer platforms, and there's many out there besides Cellar Angels, is certainly one way to do that, and just buying it direct from the source. For the record, I and the chief operating angel are drinking John's 2018 Grenache, and it is one of our favorite wines for a variety of reasons. It is an extremely food-friendly wine, but the price point on this is hysterical. I think John could charge another $20 a bottle and be fine, but this Grenache is so fantastic. And John, if you want to talk about the Grenache, that would be good.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about the Grenache and also just some fun economics about what goes into the cost of this Grenache. So what do we currently have this listed for on the site? A ridiculously low price, right?
Hang on, someone told me there'd be no math. 32.
Yeah, okay. So that's our retail. So to give you an idea, a typical small producer, we're not talking about a large producer that produces hundreds of thousands of bottles of product. We're talking about most small producers. If you take away, if you're running your own winery, there's some savings. And if you have your own bottling line, there will be some savings. So this is assuming someone's coming into me and says, hey, I want to produce wine in your facility. I have to pay for everything. I'm buying some reasonably priced fruit at about $3,000 a ton, which a ton will produce approximately 50 cases of wine. I'm going to get one barrel that's a new barrel for this program. And I want you to make this wine. And the taxes, by the way, right now are relatively low. So I didn't figure in taxes. This is just an all-inclusive number. Chances are, once they finish bottling this wine, it's going to cost them about $13 a bottle in COGS to produce that bottle of wine. That would be kind of your bare bones cost to get a label, a capsule, cork, bottle, and all the winemaking, the bottling, and getting it out to a warehouse.
At $3,000 a ton, though.
That's at $3,000 a ton. That's producing about 50 cases of wine. It would be about $13 a bottle. So
and
that's
COGS are cost of goods.
Cost of goods. Thank you, Pete. Yes, cost of goods. So this is how crazy, a lot of the economics go into how much our labor costs here, how much our basically rent or land costs here. So how much it costs to operate a facility. A lot of that kind of gets built into those numbers if I'm charging out those services to somebody to make a bottle of wine. I mentioned that number because, as I was kind of getting ready for today, it reminded me of a bottle of wine. This is a family-owned winery in France. In fact, Pete, you've had this bottle, right? It's in Chablis. The vineyards have been owned by this family now for 3 generations. The third generation is taking over the winery from dad.
And all the Cellar Angels know that Chablis is about 63 miles outside of Burgundy.
Thank you. Yep, 63 miles out of Burgundy. Well, it's actually, roughly 2 hours from Paris, if you think about it, roughly 2 hours from Paris. But northern Burgundy, this is a Chardonnay, if you're not familiar with Chablis. And this bottle of wine, no discounts, no inner winery discounts, just walking into the winery cellar to buy this bottle of wine. This bottle of wine cost me $17. It was about 15 euros. The neighbor next door, same little vineyard location, it cost me $15 or 12 euros, 12, 13 euros. So almost the cost of a bottle of wine to make here, I was able to get this bottle of wine in France. Just kind of give you some economics differences between California and France. So I thought that was kind of an interesting.
Well, and it's interesting too, because that cost structure, you currently are only at the production phase. You haven't begun to get an application to be able to sell into a state. You haven't hit the road. You have
none of those other overhead costs go into it. Correct.
Yeah. Exactly. It clearly, so from a operating cost perspective, it's quite expensive in California compared to Burgundy.
In some cases, yeah, definitely. So
that's incredible.
And this is a premier cru. The next one up, which is the top of the crus, is Grand Cru. The Grand Cru is about 30 euros, just to kind of give you an idea. And by the way, this premier cru is amazing. So I'm now enjoying the Grenache, a very versatile wine, probably one of my favorites to have every night because you can drink it with just about anything. If you're a person who really loves Pinot Noir, but are looking to change up your evening up, look for a Grenache because it has almost the same weight. It's a little bit lighter. But just the fruit profile of this is more strawberry versus black cherry. But I really love it because it goes really well with food. It's got good acidity. And as Denise has said on the boards, it's one of her favorites because, you guys, I call it the dangerous wine because you open it before dinner. Before you know it, it's gone. It's really dangerous. So,
Peter Glick, I see you have a hand up.
I was typing my question. That was an.
What, you went back on mute for a second.
Sorry, I'm getting too old. But if $13 a bottle is the cost for roughly 50 cases, on your scale, how many more cases do you need to produce, or how much do you need to increase your production to drive that $13 a bottle down to, let's say, call it 10? You have to triple your production, double your production, quadruple it. I'm just trying to get a feeling of the scale.
Or do you have to find fruit at $2,500 a ton?
I think that the way that you're going to drive it down is we're not talking about triple, quadruple. I think you're going to have to look at 100 times. I mean, we're talking 50 cases. You're probably needing to get at least to, well, maybe not 100 times, 50 times, you know, up to at least 1,000 cases before you start looking at discounts in your label costs, discounts in your glass costs. This is a number that I'm using for glass right now with the tariffs. So if the tariffs go away, tariffs increased my glass cost by 20%. So if I'm able to find a local producer, and a lot of the local glass producers are selling glass at about the same rate that I could buy glass from China with the 20% tariff. Right now, what we're facing in California and across the United States is a shortage of wine glass, a shortage of paper for wine labels. So the entire distribution channel is disrupted even in the wine industry. I have a bottling coming up on December 10th, and my label producer is still trying to get paper, and my cork and glass person is trying to secure glass, and they're actually working with another glass vendor to get glass for me. So those are the challenges.
And what
So
happens
that's,
if,
I mean, to me, that's fascinating because it shows that there's a huge growth pattern you have to get to before you really get to the next level up. I mean, it's not, that's very interesting. Thank you.
No, and actually to take that one step further for you, I was told that if I want to get to about, do 1,000 or 2,000 cases, and I was told this years ago, you're putting yourself in a position where you really are going to be losing a lot of money because you also need the staff and manpower to come in to help you when you get to that size, but yet you don't have enough inventory to still cover all the other costs. What I've done to pivot is I also produce wine for about a dozen other people. They're alternating proprietors, so they're paying me an AP fee every month, so that helps chip away at my own rent. And then they're paying me a services fee to make all their wine for them. If I hadn't done that, I probably would be out of business right now. And it's by pivoting years ago in that direction, allowing me to make wine for other people that don't have the assets that I now have, because I have all of the state-of-the-art equipment in my facility. So it's allowed me to really be able to stay going. But Martin and I were talking yesterday, and he asked me, why do I do this? And I do this because I love wine. I love this world. I love the passion that people that I talk to have about wine making, wine growing. What Pete didn't tell you, and he's a modest guy. He is again a legend here in the wine industry and also in the grape growing community. A phenomenal person that understands all the science in the vineyard as well as all the science in winemaking. And you talk to people like Pete in the industry, and that makes me excited about being in this industry. And I'm honored to just be able to talk to people that have been around really for decades. So it's a great industry to be in because people are really, in general, very camaraderie in terms of dealing with the challenges. Last year with the fires, we've had years and years, and all of a sudden we end up with this lightning thing that comes in that's completely unusual here in California. And then on top of that, just as things start getting under control, another set of fires, damaging a ton of fruit, and then watching people pivot and trying to be able to make decisions about the fruit that they've been growing all year. Can I get this off in time before it's damaged? And can I make quality wine? And everyone talking to everyone. I mean, we share information constantly about how we're going to be able to jump through this next hoop. So that's why I do it. If I had wanted to just make lots of money, I would have stayed in tech. And right, Pete?
Yeah, no, I'll bring it back a little
Please.
bit further. The smoke taint problem has been around since, 3 or 4 years. And for instance, I'll give you for instance, one of our larger members, not huge, but larger member, who had the ability to put in the analytical data on smoke taint, offered that to our members. If you're a member of Family Winemakers, we'll check your wines for smoke taint, which has a major financial impact on a winery. And so it's this, what keeps me engaged in the whole thing is the camaraderie and the support from my members like Jon, who, even though he doesn't look like an emeritus, is. Jon has been there for us, and we at Family Winemakers really appreciate his input.
And it's something that's funny you mentioned that, Pete, the camaraderie and the ability of the community to stick together and lift each other up. And it's something we've heard time and time and time again, and we've echoed it to Cellar Angels everywhere. It's my favorite aspect of the industry, is that if I'm tasting with Jon and it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'd say, look at my watch and say, there's probably another 90 minutes or so of tasting left. Where should I go taste? Jon will legitimately tell me, go check out this producer, or go see Susan at such and such winery. She's doing some amazing stuff with Rhone Blanche. You're going to love it. And there's a genuine authenticity to that. And it's on both sides of the valley. Napa does the same thing, because I think everyone recognizes that a rising tide, in fact, does raise all boats. And if you can rise and sink together, but it's the only industry where I've seen that. And I've used the example when I speak around the country that, if you go into Home Depot and they're out of a tool, they are not going to send you to Lowe's. They're not going to send you to Sears and Roebuck if Sears and Roebuck is still around. So it's interesting to see what this industry is capable of doing for each other. But I also think it's fascinating what Jon just talked about with regards to the economics of having to buy fruit better, the competitiveness of raw materials and COGS, because the bottle cost on the tariffs, that wasn't borne by the distributor, that's borne by Jon. And Jon just can't raise his wine prices 20%, because then the consumer will have a revolt. So it's a very, very razor edge balance of economics that has a lot of nuance to it. That's very, very difficult to sell wine vintage to vintage and build up that client base around the country, especially as it gets harder to travel and we get older. So Family Winemakers is doing a great job trying to get the word out. We appreciate it, Pete, all the effort. I'll raise a glass to Pete.
Hey, to Pete Downs.
Actually, one of the things that Jon has recognized that we try and pass on to our other small members is the difference between a fixed cost and a variable cost. So Jon's rent is a fixed cost.
Mhm.
If he can spread that over numerous wineries, that brings his cost of goods, as he referred to earlier, as COGS, down. And so that's a very important concept. I don't know where everybody else is on a business, but fixed and variable costs are extremely important.
Well, I was saddened to learn today that you cannot own a winery license if you're a convicted felon. So that's not good news for a lot of the crew at Cellar Angels. So
Is that a personal comment?
hopefully we can get that rule overwritten. Jon, the 2020 vintage at Inspiration, was there a 2020 vintage?
Yes. 2020 was interesting. So we lost almost, I would say, probably 2/3 of the production that we were going to do for clients. Could not bring fruit into our facility to make wine. What's interesting is that so I farm about Oh, let's see. So again, as a small producer and being around in Sonoma County for quite some time, I've had some relationships with folks that own land, own vineyards. They may own a 1 acre plot of grapes or a 2 acre plot of grapes. And they get a quote that's just outrageous about how much it will cost to farm it. And so they'll come to me and say, hey, do you want this fruit and would you farm it? Because you can have the fruit. I don't want to spend any more money anymore on my vineyard. And I'll say, sure, I can sell this because it's Sonoma County. I'd be happy to take over the vineyard. So I've got now about 4 different vineyards that I farm. One is the Zinfandel that I'll be bottling this vintage from 2020, which we picked off before the fires. 2 little Pinot Noir vineyards in Russian River that we picked off before the fires, and a Cabernet Sauvignon vineyard over in Sonoma Valley that we picked off before the fires. And we were able to get fruit from, because of COVID, we had people also cutting back on what they were going to produce. So we already knew going into it before the fires that we were going to kind of struggle a little bit. But what's interesting is we had a relationship with a landowner who my partner, my production manager, helped develop the property. And it was his first year of Cabernet Sauvignon out of Calistoga. So Napa County, Calistoga fruit, and didn't have a buyer for any of that cab. And so I made a deal with them. I said, if you pay $1,000 up front, our normal production costs charges are $2,300 a ton. If you pay me $1,000 a ton to produce this into fantastic wine, we'll collect a 5% commission on this bulk wine if we sell it, and you'll get the proceeds. And we'll probably average about $3,000 a ton, the equivalent, by selling this finished wine if we're able to sell it for you. And the person said, great, because I don't have a buyer for it anyway. We were able to get all of that Cabernet Sauvignon off before the second round of fires came in and damaged almost all the other fruit that was hanging in the valley in Napa. Same thing is true with the Pinot Noir. Where this Grenache is grown, we have our Grenache grower grows a ton of Pinot. He had no buyer for it. We saw that the lightning complex fires come in. The Pinot was at perfect ripeness, but a lot of people would hang it another week, and we said, just get it off, because that part of the valley, the smoke would come down. We did not want that to happen. What's really sad is he also had a lot of Grenache still hanging, but we got enough for our program when we were picking all the Pinot. We said, bring in a couple of tons of the Grenache so that we can make our Grenache. And, literally within a week, that whole situation changed in that part of Sonoma Valley. Everything else that was left hanging there, Zinfandel we've worked with, Grenache that we've worked with, all was ruined by smoke. And then the other wine that I ended up making, which I normally bottle, is our Viognier. Again, same situation. The grower had Pinot, they had Viognier. We made the Viognier, we made the Pinot, and I had someone come to me and say, John, I wasn't able to make any white wine this year. Can I buy all your Viognier from you? So we pivoted in a year where we lost a lot of our individual client work, but we ended up doing these super huge lots for us of Pinot Noir, of Cabernet Sauvignon, and we were able to sell it as bulk wine July of this year, right before harvest, clear out our cellar, to buyers that needed them for their programs because there wasn't clean wine available on the market. And it kept us in business.
Good. I'm glad there's going to be a lot of 2020. Tell me about, and tell Alyssa specifically about the label, her label that she's putting up with the grape cluster. We want to know about the labels.
Okay. So, all right. There's the story, right, Martin? So, okay. So first of all, this is the original Inspiration label. I'm drinking the 17 Grenache right now. That little yellow house is the little yellow house I lived in from 2001 until 2017.
From Up.
Pardon?
I think it's from the movie Up.
The Up, that is correct. A lot of people have said that, the Up house. And the vineyard behind Martin is the vineyard that I farmed on the property. In 2017, my wife and I went separate ways. It was amicable. In fact, we still talk to each other. And in fact, she lives 8 blocks from me now in downtown Santa Rosa. And we sold the property as part of the divorce. And so part of it was, okay, I need a new label. I no longer live in the little yellow farmhouse. and starting a whole new life. And so there's this wonderful artist, his name is Nakona, said, you know what, let's completely change the whole direction of the label, including the logo and the design. And so he actually came up with the 3 initial panels. The panel that you're seeing now on the Grenache is the Veraison Panel. And I initially, when this came to me, it was a black and white pen and ink drawing of grapes. The other panels are basically bloom. So it was a pen and ink panel of the actual grapes in bloom. So you see the cluster and the small little flowerings. And then the third one, the third panel initially was a pen and ink of basically a harvest moon, but fall. And so when I first saw it, it was all black and white. It didn't pop. There's bloom. So that's one of the other 2 labels. And there's, yeah. So I said, let's add some color to a single element of the label. And so I told him what color I wanted added to each of the 3 labels, and that's how the new labels were formed. And I want to get one more label. The Pinot label's different now. And in fact, I don't know how much time we have, Martin. How much time do we have?
It's actually it's a season finale special. We have 2 more hours.
Oh, great. Perfect. Excellent. Well, then hold on. Hold your hat. Hold on to your hat.
Well, while John's looking up some research, I will do closing credits to let you all know that you should definitely consult us for holiday gifts for colleagues and or friends. It doesn't matter if you're buying 2 gifts or 200. And for those of you in the investment banking field or private wealth management, we understand the FINRA requirements, can easily navigate those and do it every single year. So definitely think of Cellar Angels for some unique gifts, because not everybody can buy wines like the ones that John produces. They aren't available in stores.
Okay,
John.
Can I share a screen?
Please.
Okay, I'm gonna share a screen real quick. This is the Pinot. This is the Pinot label. So you can see the difference in style, same artist, but this is really looking at Russian River Valley. And so that was kind of his idea. So the Pinot Noir label completely is different than the other labels that you have. So
I like it. Very pretty.
So what I want him to do is one more pen and ink, very similar to the 2 that you just saw, the Bloom and the Veraison, because I make 3 different Rhone varieties, the Viognier, the Grenache, and the Syrah. And I'd like to have all 3 of those consistent with each other. So that kind of answers the question of the label design and what we did.
No, I like the pivot on labels. I like the pivot as far as the winery is concerned too, with the fires. Everything is turning out fantastic. Find previous SIP episodes on our YouTube channel. And if you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel, please do so. It's the quickest way to see when these videos come up if you're unable to tune in every Friday. Next week, we've got a little bit of a special because we're going to have 2 winemakers on. Lise Asemont from Dot Wines and Kevin Borofsky from Montan-Roos are both going to be on, and they're going to be discussing why Healdsburg is the hottest thing in wine country right now. That is the episode for next week. I want to say thank you to John and Pete. Pete, it was an absolute honor to have you on the program, and thank you for talking about family winemakers. Really a special organization, and I think there should be more than 150 members. Let's see if we can get up to 1,000, where we can really start shaking the trees and getting some things done. All of you play a big role in this, because when you buy from these independent wineries, you are actually helping them keep the lights on, and that is something that's near and dear to all of our hearts. So have a wonderful evening, have a fantastic weekend, stay safe, and thank you all so much for your support. Cheers, John. Cheers.
Thanks,
Pete.
guys. Bye-bye.